Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the Branch Podcast. Pastor Chris coming to you here. Just a little bit different format. We're going to try some new things out with the Branch Podcast, but it's still same great conversation. As a matter of fact, we had someone submit a question today, and the conversation that we had was phenomenal. We're going to talk a little bit about violence, having a warrior mindset, and how we reconcile that with Christ's his ethic of what seems like nonviolence. So what does the Bible really teach about it? So it's a great conversation. I can't wait for you to check it out. So stay tuned. We'll be there in just a second. So we had a guy email in and ask a question about can we have a warrior mindset and be Christians? Like, is the thought process of Christ, and particularly, and he asked a question about like the scripture of turning the other cheek. So he asked this question: can we have a warrior mindset and honor Christ in that way? And I want to talk about that today. But before we get into that, like the question that I want to start with, it's a little bit more lighthearted, but I grew up watching action movies, loved like war movies, martial art movies. Like, who am I kidding? I still love those type of movies.
That's what I,
So growing up, or even now, who was your favorite action hero? Like, who was the person that you kind of gravitated to, or the figure? I don't know.
I feel like we talked about this one day in the office, because I remember this conversation came up, like particularly within the context of movies and stuff. But I have to say one of mine for sure was Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Oh yeah.
Like a lot, like when I think of being a kid, like even into my teenage years, he had produced so many movies, like action movies. And it wasn't just like some of them, like Bloodsport, it was like the physical, like martial arts type stuff. But then other movies incorporated both. So it was like shooting movies as well as martial arts. But he was in so many of them. But I mean, there was guys like Steven Seagal. I don't think I liked him as much. He was big in like the 90s, but he's also kind of he's a character now, like in real life.
He's such a cheeseball now that you're like, oh.
He's trying too hard at this point.
To be fair, I loved him and turned out to be a fraud. He does not know a lick of martial arts, from what I understand.
Is that for real?
Yeah, for real.
I don't know, man. Some of the videos of him at these places just seem so staged. And stuff. Like, God, I don't know about that.
I thought he was supposed to have been like a legit. Well, I know Jean-Claude Van Damme was for real.
Yes.
Like,
did you see that commercial with Jean-Claude Van Damme? This is probably a few years ago, where he's doing the splits and two semi trucks are driving.
Was it like a Super Bowl commercial or something?
Yeah, and it was like really him and really shot and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I mean, he's got to be in his 60s. You'd imagine.
I think he's pushing 70s.
Yeah. He's like
That's
still
crazy.
super fit.
60s, 70s. Yeah. But yeah. He
I would have actually liked Steven Seagal. Like I liked his stuff at that time, because I graduated in 97, so we're a little bit different generation. Oddly enough, I think my brother Daniel had a Commando shirt. We weren't allowed to see the movie, but we just knew the basic idea is that Arnold Schwarzenegger kicks butt, right?
Yeah.
And so like with him and then Sylvester Stallone was uniquely tough because he had both the Rocky and the Rambo side of it. And then like in the 90s, he had like movies, Demolition Man, Cliffhanger, those movies that when you go back and watch them, you're like, they're cheesy as all get up, but they still hit. Like you're like, it's like one of those movies that if you were flipping through like TV and it was on, you'll stop it.
You'll always stop and watch it.
That's a perfect description of those movies.
Yeah, you're never going to say like, oh, I want to sit down and watch this movie.
Exactly. But when you see it on, it's totally worth it.
Yeah, I'll watch it.
I always had a thing for martial arts. So like any action movie that like really highlighted like the training scenes of martial arts and like the whole realm of it. So like you said, Jean-Claude Van Damme, like Lionheart might be one of my favorite like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. Bloodsport was good.
Bloodsport,
Bloodsport is really
that
good.
one was wild.
Did you like the Karate Kid movies, or was that too?
I like
cheesy?
the Karate Kid movies. I like the principles behind the Karate Kid movies. I thought Ralph Macchio was really cheesy, but
do you know they're making another one?
Yeah, yep.
That's crazy, man. They're gonna squeeze every drop they can out of that franchise.
Well, I think they did that other TV series.
Cobra Kai.
I think that surprisingly hit. Like I don't think they were expecting it to hit like it did.
Yeah. Well, I think it was one of those ones where they produced it somewhere else, and then Netflix showed it. Like they thought it was a dud, ended up being an absolute banger, and then they were like, "We're gonna keep producing this," and now there's like 5 or 6 seasons of it.
It's like a YouTube show.
I was gonna say I think it started on YouTube, and Netflix bought it because it's like this went.
They knew.
So, but yeah, I love it. Love the action movies. So let's just kick into this idea. Is a warrior mindset, like, is that something that's compatible with Christianity? When we think about like turning the other cheek, Jesus being not ever really like his concept of Messiah being that of a warrior. How do we think about
Yeah, I think we have to define just for a second what warrior means, because
Sure.
from the context of who wrote it, he goes to our church, I know him. He's a veteran, and he's talking about the idea of, I'm assuming, fighting in wars, also self-defense.
Sure,
Someone comes
yeah.
to your house, or just personal attack, like on the street or something. And so, like, are able to fight back? So I think when he's saying warrior mindset, I don't think it's necessarily just, can we be violent?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah,
it's not saying like we're going out and initiating violence. So yeah, I mean, that is a difficult topic, because I think anything when we talk about with Jesus and his instructions, it's so easy to pick one verse here and there and just take it within its unique context and miss all the other things that Jesus and the scriptures say about it. So we talk about this often. We were actually talking yesterday about the idea of judging, because Jesus says, do not judge in one portion of one teaching. And people will take that, not study any other context of that topic, and go, here's what Jesus said. Jesus said, you cannot judge.
Right.
Well, no. I mean, in that same chapter of the Bible, literally the next verses, he talks about basically labeling false prophets. Well, you can't label a false prophet unless you've judged them. And then he says numerous times, you judge a tree by its fruit.
Yeah.
So you have to look at not just the one specific teaching of Jesus, you have to look at the context of it. And so when you look at a passage like turn the other cheek, and there's a couple other parts of that, of if someone asks you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. I think I'm saying the distance is correct. If someone, what's the other one? My mind's just drawing a blank. Once your jacket, give them,
give him your jacket and your tunic,
and
essentially.
basically your undergarment, which always.
But then he follows it with love your enemies.
Right, love your enemies. Yeah, it's right. Again, I think that's the good of this discussion today will be, let's just talk about all of it. Let's talk about, what did he literally mean to turn the cheek? What does he talk about in your enemies, labeling enemies? What does that look like? How do you respond to them? And how does that, what's an enemy? I mean, these are some of the questions I have, like, that I want to talk about. What's an enemy in an ongoing life, like a normal relationship, an enemy versus someone who's trying to inflict violence on you? Because I think those are two different things.
Yeah.
You might have an enemy at work, right?
Yeah.
You might have an enemy in your own family, that's someone that's constantly a thorn in your flesh, but it's dramatically different than someone who's trying to break into your home and kill you or your family.
Right, that's what I was going to say. I think my opinion is that sometimes people take what Jesus is saying there further than what Jesus intended it to be, right? So like the context is about retaliation, and even the idea of like, if someone hits you on the cheek, turn your other to them. Like in the context, in the first century context, Jesus is talking more about humiliation and insult than he is physical violence. Like we take that at face value without the actual historical context of what Jesus is saying and the rest of the context of what he talks about. I think he's talking about retaliation. And you do see that throughout the scripture in the sense of like, later on, Peter talks about what Jesus did in that, like he wasn't like, when he was slandered and when he was accused, he didn't respond in the same way that oftentimes the world would respond when those things happen. Or even if we're all being honest, what comes natural to us, someone insults us, we want to insult them in return. Someone hurts us, we want to hurt them in return. So Jesus is talking about really a form of retaliation and vengeance, not specifically the idea of self-defense. Like even if you think practically about the idea of vengeance, if someone comes and hurts a family member of mine, and I'm now plotting and planning, like, what can I do to get back at them? What can I do to hurt them? That is not the same situation as someone kicking in your front door at 2 a.m. with a gun to rob your house, where there's an immediate response of, I can try to stop the threat. I can try to protect my family. That's not the exact same context.
What's the difference between reciprocating evil or stopping evil? And so like the thought process of like even self-defense is an effort to stop someone from being an aggressor, to stop someone from doing some form of evil. I think we have that concept within Christianity, particularly if we were think about it in a language or like a heart posture. We want to resist someone who is doing something that is harmful and not directed towards godly living. So like if we saw a friend who was going off of a cliff, we would stand against them, even if that was their greatest desire, and resist them in that moment. I think in moments where evil is being done against other people, I think there is a level of responsibility to stand in and stop that evil as we can. I think another part of the question, though, is to what degree does that happen when we're thinking about it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is it all like we go to the utmost degrees as far as like we kill them, or is there like, do we stop? Do we do the best we can to stop it as early as possible? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So the God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we always have to acknowledge that, because I think sometimes people think God was different and he's not. So some of the values we get to understand God's perspective, we have to look at both the Old and New Testament. I mean, in the Old Testament, there's a command. I just read it recently. It's either in Exodus, I think it's like Exodus 20 something, but that could also be Deuteronomy 22. There's some overlap in that.
Yeah.
But in it says if someone breaks into your house and dies, that person is free of blood guilt. That's the language that was used oftentimes.
Yeah.
And it's the idea of like there's some behavior that you're guilty of it. So like you get mad at someone and you grab a hammer and kill them, you're guilty of blood guilt.
Right.
You have blood guilt. And so like it tells you, take that person, take them outside your camp, put them to death. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You know, like you take a life, you lose your life. But then in that other passage, it's saying it's giving permission that if someone breaks into your home, your abode, you're able to defend yourself and you're not guilty of anything. So like there's passages like that. We also see all the way throughout the scriptures that God gives nations the right to declare war, to govern themselves and to declare war. And when God was in charge, when it was a theocracy, he commanded the nations to go to war at times and to fight and to defend. And it's not considered murder. So there is a difference, even when we see in the 10 Commandments, killing is murdering, the language that's used there.
Right.
And that's
There's a
different
distinction.
than just simply taking a life. Because in the other situations I said, now some of these things have changed now in our culture, but if someone was obeying the commands of God and stoning someone to death, that would not be considered murder because it was following the law of God. So there were laws given both to go to war, but also to govern the society.
Right.
And so like, if you're a police officer, if you're a soldier and you are following the commands of your nation, then there is a freedom there. Now that said, I think there would be a certain level of, you could be we even have it in our culture, conscientious objector, that if your nation was deciding to, do genocide and just to wipe out another nation, and you're like, I don't feel like that's honoring God.
Right.
I think it would be in your rights not to do it. But yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think this brings up the classic debate around like just war theory, right? So this idea of, and this is maybe an oversimplification of a very complex topic, but like the idea that in not responding or not doing something, not utilizing force, is that potentially a greater evil than utilizing force? So we were talking earlier, like you think of like specifically World War II. The United States basically stood like they were on the outside of what was going on until Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, which, for some people they say like completely unprovoked, just attacked Pearl Harbor. And then you think about like what the Nazis were doing in Europe. I mean, they were essentially marching across Europe, killing millions of people. I mean, for all intents and purposes, like plotting an entire takeover of Europe. And so you have that idea of like, in that particular case, is it more just to take up arms against an evil regime to stop evil and innocent lives and bloodshed from happening? Or is it, do you take the pious moral high ground to say, well, we're taking the pacifism approach and we're not going to take up arms. We're not going to do this because we don't believe in bloodshed. We don't believe in violence. And so that's like the classic just war theory. And you can apply that to, even as we were talking earlier, like the concept of self-defense. I mean, I've wrestled with this a lot in my life because there is a part of this where as a Christian, I never want my motivation or desire to be violence, bloodshed, taking a life, hurting another person. Like if you're a Christian and there is some low-level desire that like someone steps to you so that you can put a beating on them, like that is sinful. That's a sinful mindset. It's not something you should desire. It's not something you should want. But I've also wrestled with, if someone were to break into my house, and again, I realize these are hypotheticals and most people, thanks be to God, are not going to experience this ever in their lives. But if you were, is it more evil for me to hurt or potentially take the life of an intruder, someone with evil intent, or to simply allow them to hurt my family, my kids, my wife, because I don't want to do harm to them? And then I have to wrestle with, what does it mean to be a godly husband, father in a situation like that? What does that look like, right? Is it merely this kind of blanket generalization of, well, we just don't participate in any sort of violence, or does it matter about our desires and our motivations? And one of those things where you're like, my hand was forced in this situation. It's not something I chose. It's not my ideal. It's not what I wanted.
Yeah, I think the broader question of like what does the Bible teach about violence? I think that's a huge topic, and I don't think it's clear. Like I think you get a sense of like I think you're right. Like in that we cannot like it's not it's not the ideal. So I think the ideal is we live peaceably with others. I think the
Yes.
ideal is there's no purpose or no need for violence. But the Bible exists in a world that is full of violence. The Bible exists in a world that addresses violence, and the Bible exists in a world where violence needs to be evil is maybe the better term. Evil needs to be stood against for the purposes of the flourishing of the world. And I think God does you work within this tension, this unique dynamic where He's constantly working towards. The ideal would be if somebody doesn't break into your house.
Exactly.
The reality is
they follow the law,
right,
and they're not committing an evil act or threatening your family.
Right. So, but I think we're left to wrestle with this, and this is an ethical problem.
Sure.
Like in the strictest sense of the terms. And I think we do have to wrestle with it. And I think it does come down to what are our desires? What like and here's the tension that I wrestle with is like, can I have this type of mindset that would make me equipped to be to be a protector in that way? Can I have that mindset and still have my default position be, I want to see your redemption before I see your destruction?
Yeah.
And like, I think that is that's a hard thing to hold in a human mind.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. So this would be a question I would throw out. So I think about one of the things that's come to me over the years is thinking about Romans 13, where Paul it's interesting to me, even his language about government and believing that God has instituted government. And particularly he talks about governing authorities, and he uses this terminology of like, they don't bear the sword in vain. And really what he's talking about is like, he's saying they are a threat to evildoers, right? That these governing authorities are put into place to be a threat, not to those who are doing good and doing what is right, but a threat to those who are evil and doing harm. So my question would be, number one, if you even take the spirit of that idea to this conversation around self-defense, but even more specifically, here in the United States, right, we are Christians living in America under both federal and state laws that permit to a certain degree the idea of self-defense. The idea of a stand your ground law, and there's debates about that, but like as Christians, our law permits us, the governing authorities permits us to defend ourselves in the case of a violent attack on ourselves or someone around us, our family members and loved ones. So what do we do with that?
Yeah, again, I think the challenge really is, you guys have both said it, but the challenge is really to check your own heart in that situation. I mean, I love the way you phrased it. Like, if you're just looking to find someone to step up to you so you can lay a beating on someone, obviously then your heart, there's a corruptness to it. So I think what Jesus is encouraging us to do, I don't think there is a one set standard. I think that's one thing we'll be clear on, because every situation has such uniqueness to it. But what Jesus is asking us to do as Christians is to always, if we can, if at all possible, take a posture that says, if by surrendering my rights, I can add a redemptive element to the person who is wrong, then that's what we should take.
Yes.
But I don't think there's a universal standard that defines that and what that looks like.
Right.
So like, I mean, even when we talk about, so modern day language, we would use probably the terminology of guns, right? Because that's the number one item for self-defense in a home, that or a baseball bat, you know, as I'm thinking.
Fists.
Or your fist, right? But I remember Michael, when he was on staff, like he said, I think he kept a bat by his bed, you know, and I always thought that was funny because to me, I'm like, man, you're going to like hand-to-hand combat with someone.
Yeah, I'm not bringing a bat to a gunfight.
No, neither am I, which I have a funny story about that later. But even like with that situation, like in the scriptures, it would be a sword, right? Most likely, you could say spear or knife or something, but most likely a sword. And Jesus allowed his disciples to carry swords, and he didn't rebuke them. We were talking about this earlier. I mean, from the language where Jesus said, if you have 2 tunics, go sell one and buy a sword. And then the second one was this sad story, but where Peter, when Jesus was arrested, pulls out a sword and takes a swing to kill a guy, chops off his ear, and Jesus heals him, rebukes him, and says, he who lives by the sword is going to die by the sword.
Right.
Put
but
your
again,
sword away.
in that situation, he was being violent where violence was not necessary in that situation. But the fact that he had a sword would show that like he was around Jesus. So maybe not all swords were condemned. But yet then in that same story, Jesus took a posture of submission because he knew the redemptive element of what he was going to do. So even when Jesus stood before Pontius Pilate and he's saying, like, don't you know the power I have over you? Jesus is like, no, fake news, right? Like, that's modern day translation. He's like, you don't have power over me except what is given to you. And so you look at this situation. The reason why I say all that, I know it's kind of confusing, but Jesus throughout that process surrendered all of his rights because there was an ultimate redemptive element that would bring. I don't think all violence brings a redemptive element. If someone is high on drugs, breaks into your house and wants to kill your family, I don't know that there's a redemptive element to that. And so, again, these are getting in hyper specifics, but like in my house, I live in the second story. All of our bedrooms are on the second story. I've thought it through. If someone broke into our house, what would I do? I would take a stand at the top of the stairs because from that location, I can protect all bedrooms, but I would not necessarily go downstairs and look for a fight. I wouldn't look to go shoot someone, and I have guns, and I'm not, but in my mind, I just thought that would be the better way. When I took a concealed carry class years ago in Detroit, the guy who taught it was a retired police officer. He said, stand at the top of your stairs and rack a 12 gauge. He goes, because it's the most universally acknowledged sound in the world, you know?
Sure.
But his whole
enough
thing
to
was,
scare me.
Yeah, but his whole thing was, don't go look for a gunfight. Forget the movies, right? He said, stand in a position that says, I don't want to do this, but if you come up these steps, this is what you're going to be met with. And I think there is an element that's okay, right? To protect your family.
Well, I think you bring up again, like what I mentioned about the hypothetical of the person who's looking to put a beating on someone, like they're looking for someone to mess with them so that they can get in a fight. I think there's that same mentality that some potential Christian men have with that same scenario. Like, man, I dare someone to break into my house because they're going to find out. And I would say, man, like that should not be your heart's desire. You should not want someone to break into your house. You should not, and not that anyone would say, I want someone to break into my house, but the idea of like, it's my moment of glory. It's my moment to defend my household. And while we might say there might be a necessity in that, and even some level of righteousness in defending your spouse and your children, certainly that's not something you should want to have to do. And you guys have maybe heard the story that this actually happened to me. Like for people listening to this, when I was in I was still in college for sure. I would have been probably 21 at the time, maybe my senior year, at my parents' house when two guys showed up at literally like 2:30 in the morning. And we found out later they had cocaine on them because the cops ended up showing up. But they went to the back of the house. Our dog was barking, and we just knew, like, if you're at someone's house at 2:30 in the morning, there's a dog barking, and that's not enough to deter you. That's a concern. Like that was a concerning moment of like, these dudes aren't going away, to the point that they ended up rattling the back door. So they went from the front to the back, and I had a pistol on me. And in that moment, the weight of what I thought I was going to have to do was so horrible and overwhelming that like, it is nothing like the movies, right? It's not like this idea of, man, like I'm gonna put these guys down. The thought of, if these guys break this door open, my family is here with me, I'm gonna have to potentially shoot these guys, was a horrible thought. It was not at all like, man, I can't wait to do this, right? Like if you're having those thoughts, man, you not only need to check your heart, you should probably get some therapy, like because that's problematic.
I was gonna say,
you've seen too many movies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the hard part of that is, and I think is this idea of like, violence always has consequence. So if violence is enacted, whether it be righteous violence or whether it be violence that was used to self-protect, you have to know that it's always going to come with a consequence. And I remember talking to a veteran one time, and I think he got upset with me. But what I was trying to explain was this idea, and he was saying, is it wrong for me as a veteran, because I was in war and I've killed people within war, like, is that a sin? And I said, no, not necessarily. I said, but the reality is that the nature of violence breeds destruction. And what I meant was like, that might not be a sin, but you have to live with the consequences that you've killed, that you've taken in life. And that is that never happens lightly. It never happens in a way that is like that is void of it. Like if you're okay with it, I think that's something broken. And I know
Right.
The difficulty with military, and I even wrestled with this, like, because I thought about going into the military, was the idea of, am I willing to put myself in that place to where I would do where I could do that, and know that, like, knowing that I would be desensitized to that, and could I live with these tensions that I had in my life? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying, like Jesus tells the warrior, I forget where it's at in the scriptures, but he's talking to soldiers, and he's like, he doesn't tell them to stop being soldiers. He tells them to not extort, to do unjust violence. It wasn't like change your job. So like, I think it can happen, but I think we have to wrestle, and we have to be aware with, like, when we're invited into a moment where violence is the response that we have to give. I think we have to realize it's going to affect us. And I think it stems back to, like, it is not the ideal in any way, shape, or form.
Right. In every violent situation, there's going to be a minimum of 2 victims. I mean, even the person who wins, he's still the victim, or she's the victim, because it damages your heart. And I think that's, even if we go back to what Jesus was talking about when he said to turn your cheek, I really do believe the command of Jesus, what he's communicating is, don't become the evil that's being inflicted on you.
Yes.
So if someone smacks you, what is natural is to smack them back. It's to repay evil for evil. But what he's talking about is, you then take on the consequence of that, because all of a sudden now your heart is darker. Someone wants you to go 1 mile. And so, like, you can go to rage, you can go to how unfair it is, or you can make a choice that says, you know what, I'm not going to become the evil that this person is. I'm going to go an extra mile. And so that's the heart of Jesus, is recognizing in every situation that if you're going to repay evil for evil, you might be justified, but there's still going to be a consequence.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of the teachings of Jesus that are that way, where his ultimate purpose is your heart. It's not necessarily that he's trying to define all of these rules. This is the specifics of every single rule, as much, though sometimes there are very clear rules. It's as much of him going, I just don't want your hearts to become evil. So, like, even when he talks about your enemies, his whole idea is to love your enemy. And you look at that and you go, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you love your enemy? This is a person who is in some capacity standing in opposition to me to make my life worse. Why would I love them? And it's not because he's saying, like, oh, that's good, they're going to make your life better.
Right.
He's saying that the hatred that you're going to have toward them is actually going to hurt your life double. So not only are they resisting you, now your own rage is lessening your quality of life. And he doesn't want that. And then by that, there's the redemptive element. Now you're being the light for Jesus. I'm going to love you even though you're evil to me. And that stands as a shocking example to you. And that pushes back. That's a conviction to that person, that through that, Jesus might be able to change their lives and redeem the situation. And that's his heart. And so, again, he's not always I don't think, from my understanding of scripture, that Jesus' command was stand there and a person just smacks you. It's not, repetitively just turning the cheek. It's in a moment. You don't have to repay evil for evil.
Yeah, I think Paul echoes the exact same sentiment in Romans 12. Like, the end of Romans 12, he makes this very profound statement that says, don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil by doing good. And in a few verses earlier, though, he says, like, so far as it depends on you, and you referenced this earlier, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Like, there are situations where it doesn't depend on you. But I love what Paul is saying is the same thing that Jesus was saying, is our heart's motivation should always be redemptive. It should always be seeking the most redemptive outcome in a situation. And so, like, allowing, like, even thinking in terms of vengeance or retaliation, it's not redemptive, right? It's vindictive in the sense of, you've allowed hatred, you've allowed ill will to blacken your heart to where you want to hurt or destroy another person. And that's why I actually think even some of these hypothetical scenarios of self-defense are different, because in a moment like that, my desire is not necessarily, like, I have no ill will or hatred towards an intruder, in the sense of, like, I'm not intending or seeking to do them harm as much as I am trying to stop them from doing harm. Stop a threat or protect my family from harm. And I think that's a totally different posture and motivation than what Jesus and even Paul were addressing, this idea that it's far more prevalent in our lives, right? The person that insults us or slanders us or gossips about us or does something that offends us in some way, the natural posture of our heart is to find ways to get back at them. And there's a massive spectrum. And so while the physicality of that is really probably less frequent than most other scenarios, I think what we're talking about is the extreme. And again, we're saying the same thing, though, that our heart's posture should never be ultimately that we're trying to destroy, trying to harm people. Rather, our ultimate goal is to see redemption as much as we know how to see that happen.
Yeah. And I think when we look at Jesus and we look at his posture, his ability to, and even the call that you guys are talking about with like not returning vengeance and having a posture of redemption, like Jesus provides the way for that by not committing violence back to his enemies, because we were his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
He absorbs violence on behalf of his enemies. He stops it in a way that is it doesn't perpetuate the cycle down the path. You know what I mean? And I think I'm writing a paper right now and actually talking about violence in the book of Revelation, particularly in the line of vengeance. And so this has all been on my mind. So it's kind of unique that this kind of came in. But when you look at the weird way in which John like uses the violent imagery, violence in the book of Revelation, he really is setting up this dichotomy of like, this is the world we live in. Mm-hmm. It is a violent world. There are people who oppose both believers, and there are people who oppose or are going to oppose you in your life. And that is something that you have to live within.
Sure.
And yet we also have to live under the light of the future hope that because Jesus absorbed and because Jesus' blood was shed, we don't have to enact that violence on other people. We don't have to be the ones, even though we can have a standard of right and wrong. I think like that's one thing that I think is kind of the underlier of this, is that there is evil, there is good, there is, you know what I mean? And so there's a standard that God goes like, this is unjust. And so when we look at like even some of the divine justice that God enacts in the book of Revelation, it's all along the thread of not perpetuating violence, but by stopping evil, stopping injustice, and allowing the people that we, how do I say it? Paul goes back and says, like, we don't return evil for evil because God will judge one day and God will vindicate who was right and who was wrong. Yeah. And so we're essentially allowing God to be the controller, the driver of how violence is handled in the world. And he, above all of us, has the purest motive in that.
Right. I was going to say, when you were talking, that I don't think the example, we're doing the hypothetical, I don't think the hypothetical of someone breaking into your house is really the tough question.
Right.
I think the hypothetical is the person at work who's your enemy, who wants to destroy your life.
Yeah.
How
Absolutely.
like, so even this email that came in is the warrior mindset. Based on their questioning, I think they were talking a little bit about self-defense in that concept.
Sure.
But I think if we're talking more of a broad audience, what is the Christian response to a person at work who's incredibly nasty to you? What is the response to the person online who is posting and stuff about you? Yeah. You know, and I'm literally asking you guys, like, what is that? What's our response toward that? Because again, a person breaks into your house, that feels a little bit more black and white. Don't come upstairs unless you want to get shot, right? They come upstairs and they get shot. Like that's again, a horrible situation. None of us ever want to be in, but that feels a little bit more obvious.
Sure.
What about the person at work and when do we claim our rights? So you see someone like Paul, who would be the first one to say, die to yourself, surrender your rights, is also the one who claimed his Roman rights to defend himself in an unjust situation because he was unjustly imprisoned and not treated basically with due process. And when they found out he was a Roman citizen, they were like, oh, our bad, because there are rights that go along with that. And so we could compare that very much with the American rights that we have.
Sure.
So when do you use your rights? When do you not use your rights? When do you fight back with a person at work? When do you not fight back? I mean, what's your guys' thoughts on that?
I think we said it with the more narrow concept of self-defense. Like there's not like one right answer. I think there's principles and a heart with which we have to approach these things. But I think each thing will probably lend towards specific practical application. If it's a coworker who is just nasty to you all the time, like I feel like the best thing you can do is avoid them at best, and while still praying for them and hoping for the opportunity to allow your kindness and your love to influence them and win them over. You get somebody who's bullying you, and I even thought about, like, as you were giving examples, someone in an abusive marriage. there, I think you have avenues and ways to continue to honor the heart of Jesus while not allowing yourself to be put in a situation where evil's able to continue to be perpetuated.
Mm-hmm.
So an abusive relationship where maybe the husband is abusing the wife doesn't have to stay there and continue to take that on as the Christian loving thing to do.
Shouldn't stay there.
And shouldn't stay there.
Right.
The proper response is to keep a soft heart towards the one who is victimizing, while at the same time getting yourself into a safe situation. And so like that, I think, is the challenge that's posed to the victim in that is, can you keep a soft heart and hope that he'll be redeemed or stopped? And are you willing to get yourself out of that situation so that it just doesn't, because you continuing to put yourself in a place where he batters you and you continue to be battered. Neither one of those things, it's just perpetuating the evil of that situation, not bringing it to an end.
Yeah, this question is difficult in that, to Chris's point, there's a massive spectrum, right? From someone makes passive aggressive, offhanded remarks occasionally, right? That get under your skin. I would say to that person, if it's not hurting you, if it's not messing up your reputation, jeopardizing your job, your credibility, there are some times where you just take it on the chin. Like, honestly, I think as Christians, we want to cultivate a posture where we're not easily offended. I think there are a lot of Christians out there that have a posture of like, they're easily offended. And I think people in general, we should work really hard not to be easily offended. And I think even what comes with that is a posture of humility, where we can just laugh things off sometimes and shake our heads and go on with our day. However, there are other degrees of that where someone's gossiping about you, someone's slandering you behind your back, and it's jeopardizing your reputation in an unfair, unjust manner. This is where I would say we have to not equate confrontation with violence or confrontation with something purely negative. And what I mean by that is the idea of, there are times where we do address the situation. And I love that you said, like, there's a part of this on one side, we want to keep our hearts pure. We want to have a clean conscience, where the point of this isn't necessarily to do harm to the person, to embarrass them, to put them to shame, but maybe it is a pull them into a room and say, hey, this is something that's come to my attention. And, I've heard this on multiple times now. And I just want you to know that what you've been saying is incredibly damaging and hurtful. And I'm not trying to start conflict. I'm not trying to cause a problem. I just would ask you politely that you please stop doing that. So I think there are times, a situation like that, where confrontation is necessary. And again, as you said earlier, like the idea of putting a stop to the evil, regardless of how small or how great it is, I think there's a part of that where God has embedded in us a desire for justice. And as long as those motives don't cross over into, I'm trying to do them harm, I'm trying to get back at them, I'm trying to put them to shame, I'm trying to do what they did to me, that's a different motivation than I'm trying to stop them from doing the harm that they're doing. And again, your ultimate desire would be what Paul says in Romans 12:18, like, I'm trying to make peace to the best of my ability. And I actually have taught this for years, just that idea of like, the Christian, we should have the burden to go out of our way to be proactive, to try to make peace as best as we know how. That's not always going to be received, and it's not always going to be reciprocated, but that's not on us. Like that, God does not hold us accountable for what other people do. But I do think there's a sense in which we at times, we experience offense from someone, we let it pass. When it becomes problematic, when it becomes, consistent issue, you address it. You can confront it, but you can be tactful, you can be grace-filled, you can be honest, all of those things without being nasty, without seeking the harm of another person. And I think a lot of people think that those two are kind of the same thing, and that Christians just have to kind of take it and let it happen.
Bags.
And I was thinking of another example to flip it on its head, where grace becomes a misunderstanding. Is we've heard all of these stories about, and I think it was, I can't remember the year, but the year the Me Too movement came out, it was all these stories of women who had been abused by spiritual leaders, maybe the church movement, I think was, where they'd been abused by these spiritual leaders, and these leaders were protected under the idea of, we need to be gracious, we need to be kind. You know what I mean? And in reality, I think what God would want in that moment is justice along with grace. You know what I mean? The two are not competing ideas. And so
the consequence and grace are sometimes, or you get both.
Yeah, right.
You can get grace, but you can also get consequence, in the sense of, you break a law, you might get grace from your church, you might get grace from a spouse.
Right.
but you have consequence of the government.
Yeah.
100%.
And also in leadership. I might, if I failed as a leader, you guys might give me grace, but I still lose my position.
Right.
And that because I've disqualified myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's all I was going to say is like the right and just thing to do. And it is that it's confrontation in that moment for that person to be prosecuted if it's an illegal thing. Because that is what stops the evil of that moment. You know what I mean?
I was just going to say, because when you don't, and I think this is really important for people to hear, when you don't do that, you become complicit in enabling an evil behavior.
Yes.
Like when you, under the guise of love or grace, allow something to be continually perpetuated, whether towards you or other people around you, you've now become complicit. So in this kind of what I would call a very soft view of love that we have as a culture, which oftentimes is more enablement than it is love, I think as Christians, again, we always have to check our motivations. And there's, things we haven't talked about that are part of this is like prayer, like bringing God into this, bringing these people and situations before the Lord, saying, God, you know what's happening here. Help me, give me the wisdom and discernment I need. Give me the grace that I need to be able to address this person, to address this situation. A lot of times situations can be sticky, especially when it comes to job situations and there's, your job's on the line, your reputation. I know a lot of people like that. Those are the situations they're in. And it's like, if I do this, then I'm going to be outing this person and there's potential consequences to that. So I understand, like, this isn't always a very black and white thing, but I do think that's an important thing to recognize is when you don't address it in the name of love or the name of grace, you have to realize on the flip side, you are enabling it. At that point, you're being complicit in allowing that person to continue in harmful or potentially evil behavior.
Well, and that was the sin. Like, if you look at the story of Eli and his sons, like, and that I think, was it Samuel?
Samuel.
The book of Samuel. That was Eli's issue. Like, God judged Eli for being complicit in the wickedness of his sons. And so, exactly.
I mean, I've often said with it, when we talk about grace, it is a phrase that is misused quite a bit in the sense that people will go, well, just give me grace. And you're like, okay, wait, let's define what these terms mean. I can forgive you, but if you are repeating the same behavior over and over and over, it's no longer a thing about forgiveness. It's about your behavior needs to change. And so when people say, well, just give me grace, it's like, well, grace was never given to us to remain in sin. Grace was given to us so that we could come out of sin. So that, if we keep committing the same sin and we are struggling, God is gracious to give us the mercy that we need. But it is the ultimate goal of God is for us to get out of that destructive behavior. So sometimes you're absolutely right in our lives is someone just, if they are failing over and over, doing something sinful, something destructive, something evil, it's not love to say, I just forgive them. I just forgive them. I just forgive them while they're doing this behavior that's both destroying them and others. In love, we have to confront. So even God who disciplines. So in the scriptures where God says, I set before you a curse or a blessing, blessing is the supernatural favor. You're going in the right direction. He's going to bless you. A curse is God just stopping you to get you to turn, to go in the right direction. So he's going to supernaturally resist you. Both are motivated by love. God's blessing and curses are motivated by love. And because he wants you to go in that direction. Well, we're mimicking God. We're mimicking God in our lives to say, my ultimate goal is for your redemption, but that might be me getting in your way. And so like even at work, if someone is being uniquely destructive at work, it's not necessarily the best thing always to not address it. But if you do address it, you want to do it in the most redemptive way possible. You want to make sure your heart is in a place where you can handle that. I know for me personally, the moment someone annoys me, if I get a rude email, a rude comment said to me, I have a natural adrenaline spike that happens where I can sense it. For me, if I talk, there's a little quiver in my voice. If I go to type, my hands might have a little bit of shake. I don't know if you guys have ever been there, where you're like, oh boy, let me respond to you.
I've got the answer right now.
Boom, boom, boom. And I've learned my immediate response is not going to be my most grace-filled response. And so like I will actually type up things at times. I won't even put a name in it. Like I'll put it like on a Word document because I don't even want the chance that it gets sent, right? And I'll write it out. And then I'll take a step back and there's something therapeutic about it. But I also then go through and think, okay, what could be taken wrongly, harshly, negatively? And I try to just soften it. And there are times I'll do the select all, delete, right? Like that's not going to work. But the reason why I'm saying that is I have to get my heart in a place where I truly want to love that person and honor them. And I won't address it when I'm healthy. I won't address it until I get to the place where I go, you know what? I'm okay. I can have a conversation. And then there are times you have to have tough conversations where you have to say, I got to be honest, your behavior is offensive to me. Like as you were saying earlier, we have to go to someone and go, listen, what you're doing is ruining my reputation. It's creating a weird environment. I need you to stop that behavior. Sometimes you have to go to a boss and say, this is what's going on. I've tried to talk it over with this person. I've tried to be kind. It's not changing. And that's not you trying to destroy someone.
Right.
That's you trying to stop the a situation that's being done. And so again, as we've said, I'm going to say an overarching statement. There is no playbook that says this is exactly how you handle every situation. That's why we have the Holy Spirit. What we do know is the bent needs to be toward redemption. The bent needs to be in a loving way, in a Christ-like way. But then in each situation, you need the Holy Spirit's specific guidance to guide you. Because I know in my life, this is an honest rhythm that I have, is that I want to give grace wherever I can. So if I can and be fine, that's what I want to do. If I give grace and I'm still bothered, and another day goes by and then 2 days go by and I'm still bothered, I go, you know what? This is a situation. I have to talk it over. I got to explain it, because otherwise I'm going to have something in my heart that I don't want there. But again, if we can give grace, give grace.
100%. Well, guys, this has been a great conversation. Any closing thoughts, anything else any questions we didn't hit that you want to kind of talk through?
I don't think so.
Cool.
No, it is a good discussion. And I just want to say, for anyone else, if you have questions, we want you to send in more questions.
100%.
We love that rhythm. So we did the live one where we did open Q&A. But I think if you're going through life and you're just going, man, I faced this situation, I don't know how to handle it. If you would like for us to discuss it, most likely it would be not just a blessing for you, but for others. Send them in. They can do that at info@Tree.Church. If they have any of our own personal contact information, send it to us. And I got that one personally through a Facebook message. I will say this, I'm not on Facebook a ton, so I'd rather you send it through the church. But we're honored by it, and so hopefully this was a blessing to them.
Well, thanks, guys.